There's something that a lot of people aren't utilizing in their garden, and some people are that maybe don't need to actually. What is this? Well, it's CO2. Now in this video, we're going to go over some reasons why you may want to utilize some CO2, scenarios where you should utilize it, and a few things that you probably should know before you start putting it into your garden. Stay tuned. This video is for educational purposes only, YouTube. This video is brought to you by AC Infinity. Now, whether it be air control, air quality, lighting, or your tent itself, or the entire kit, AC Infinity has got you locked down, and they continue to innovate time after time again with just amazing products. Now, their products go very fast, well, because they're in high demand. Supply and demand is a real thing, and when you got a supply that's as great as this, you better jump on it quick. And when you do, make sure you use CLtv at checkout and you'll save some money on your order. My name is Rob and this is CLtv, and we talk all things herb. Today in particular, we're going to be talking about CO2, or carbon dioxide. Now, if you're a home grower, do you utilize CO2? Let me know below in the comment section. So how is CO2 advantageous to your garden? Well, according to scientists, specifically Dr. Bruce Bugbee, you could potentially increase photosynthesis by 30%, which is massive.
All of our studies indicate about 30% higher yields from CO2 enrichment. And that's easily cost effective for cannabis. You can either have hot CO2, which is burning by combustion, or compressed gas, which we call cold CO2. The benefits are on increased photosynthesis and increased yield.
Now, in the process here where it converts light into energy, essentially you're able to increase your light intensity by utilizing the CO2. And this could lead to faster growth overall. Another benefit is increased biomass. With enhanced photosynthesis, plants can produce more glucose, which fuels growth and leads to greater biomass production. That means not only taller plants, which not everybody needs taller plants, but potentially thicker, hardier, girthier plants. Additional CO2 can also help overall plant health. Now, this is due to the fact that it could help plants partially close the stomata, so that way they're able to essentially reduce a little bit of that water loss. Now, this can help avoid fungal issues and overall plant stress from drought. CO2 can also help with bud development. Now, utilizing this in the late veg into early flowering stage can help with that bud development overall, because again, we're going to help increase that biomass. And it can also help you deal with higher temperatures. So if you're in a space where, let's say, your light is increasing the temperature, or if you're just in a space where the environment is pretty dang hot and you can't really control that, you could increase the CO2 to potentially help your plants deal with that temperature increase. Now, most home growers aren't utilizing additional carbon dioxide in their grow because you really usually don't need it. If your ambient CO2 levels are around 400 or higher, your plants are usually going to be fine. Adding additional CO2 in there may not be useful if you're dealing with a room that doesn't have a fully sealed space, or if you're utilizing an exhaust fan, which most people should be utilizing when they're in their garden. Now, when you're outside, the natural ambient CO2 levels are going to be fine. On average, be over 400 ppm, but you can range higher depending on where you're at and the active CO2 in the area. Now, if you're trying to increase it to a point where it's even higher, where you're pushing it, you'll typically see around 800 or 1300 ppm. Now, this is usually in, again, a fully enclosed space that you make sure that you're not having any air leaking out of there. Essentially, you're trapping all of the CO2 in the space. Over 1500 ppm could potentially be toxic to your plants and harmful to people. This is where you're going to need a CO2 meter to regulate this. It's crucial. You can't just be pumping it out there thinking that you're good to go. There are plenty of natural ways to do it, but you can't guarantee that you'll get the exact amount that you're aiming for unless you have a proper meter and proper regulation to measure everything. But you're also not going to just be utilizing this in a regular standard grow. It's going to be in the proper grow conditions. Now, like I mentioned, you're going to need a controlled environment. CO2 supplementation is definitely going to be effective in an enclosed space where concentrations of CO2 can be closely managed. Typically applicable to indoor grow rooms or greenhouses with adequate sealing from preventing CO2 from escaping. Your lighting is definitely going to be a factor as well. More intense lighting will require potentially increasing your CO2 levels, as where if the additional CO2 isn't there, you're not necessarily going to be getting the benefits from the photosynthesis that you're gaining in this sense. Now, plants are going to need sufficient light to process the additional CO2 through that photosynthesis. High intensity lighting is often necessary to drive an enhanced photosynthetic process that high CO2 levels promote. Another factor is going to be the temperature and humidity in the room. Now, plants perform best with CO2 supplementation when temperatures are between 75 to 85 Fahrenheit. Now, CO2 can also cause the grow area to heat up, thus adequate ventilation and cooling systems should be in place to maintain optimal temperatures. Humidity should also be controlled between around 40 to 60% on average. And this can vary depending on your space, but again, if you're paying attention to the VPD or the vapor pressure deficit, then at that point you should be able to measure what your space is going to need, given that there's plenty of charts out there to kind of figure out that sweet point. This is crucial to facilitate plant transpiration and overall growth. Another factor to consider is the stage of growth that you're in. Now in this case, you're going to want it during the most heavy photosynthetic phase, and this will be particularly during vegetative and early flower. Adding CO2 later in flower, I haven't really seen any benefits from commercial or home grow space. Now overall, CO2 is generally more advantageous for commercial grows given they have more space to work with and they oftentimes have a sealed, controlled environment. Now, people who are in smaller grow tents or in smaller spaces that aren't fully regulated, that may not be as ideal and it may not be worth doing. There's all sorts of different alternative methods for CO2 that don't involve a tank or a burner or anything in that sense, and some of them are done DIY at home. If you know some of them, drop below in the comment section. Now again, it's important to manage the CO2 if you are adding more because it can be hazardous. I just want to emphasize this again. Too much can be bad. We do not want to have too much. You're better off to just leave it alone. Now, if you're in a situation where you're trying to increase your overall yield and production, I could see you wanting to implement more CO2 in there. But you have to make sure that you have all of these other things taken care of prior to that. Now myself, in my open grow space, I do utilize CO2, but in my grow tents, I don't add any more in. If anything, I'll go in and I'll just talk to the plants and add a little more ambient CO2 in the room.
Hello, ladies.
On average, we're going to be sitting around 400, 500 ppm, which isn't massive, but plants can grow totally fine in that. As long as you're not pushing your plants too much, maybe not utilizing crop steering, or again, having the environment that isn't set up for it, I don't necessarily feel that CO2 is mandatory. Now, can it help you? Of course. Do you need to do it? That's subjective. Now, in my space, I've got a smaller grow tent over here, which I'm utilizing some new genetics from Seedsman. Use discount code CLtv at checkout if you're looking for any genetics from them, and I have heard that they got some clones. I'll be trying some of those out soon, and I'll let you know how they go. But that's just my 2 cents and some tips. If those helped you, do me a favor, hit the like button, and of course, stay lifted. Peace.